Smoke is still rising from the tarmac at Prince Sultan Air Base this morning. Sirens are wailing across the Saudi desert. Emergency crews are scrambling through the debris of what used to be a secure American logistics hub, and Washington is actively lying to you. Forget the sanitized press briefings. The Pentagon just released a statement claiming a localized incident involving unidentified projectiles resulted in only 2 minor injuries. But the raw intelligence bleeding out through Reuters and the Wall Street Journal tells a terrifyingly different story. We are looking at least 12 American service members sustaining casualties, with multiple personnel extractions executed under critical conditions. We are looking at severe, catastrophic structural damage to the very runway where the U.S. Air Force stations its KC-135 aerial refueling tankers. This was not a random harassment drone. This was a theater-level kinetic breach. But the casualty discrepancy isn't even the most alarming part of this morning's crisis. The real terror is buried in the vocabulary the United States government has deliberately chosen to use: unidentified. Let that word echo in your mind for a second. The United States maintains the most sophisticated, densely layered, multi-billion-dollar aerospace tracking architecture on the face of the earth across the Arabian Peninsula. They track commercial flights, they track weather balloons, they track low-altitude commercial drones. And yet, when a weapon system effortlessly pierces the Patriot missile grid, craters a strategic runway, and inflicts double-digit American casualties, the most powerful military in human history suddenly claims it cannot identify what hit them. You and I both know that is not an intelligence failure. That is a mathematically calculated cover-up. Because naming the specific profile of the weapon that just shattered Prince Sultan Air Base requires admitting something the Pentagon is structurally incapable of saying out loud: that their entire regional air defense doctrine has just been rendered completely obsolete. They are playing a game of narrative hide-and-seek, hoping the public won't connect the dots. But in military intelligence, we don't rely on press secretaries. We rely on operational signatures. And to deduce exactly what paralyzed an American base this morning, we just need to look at a blood-soaked precedent that occurred exactly 8 days ago, in a fortified bunker, hundreds of miles away. Let me take you back exactly 8 days. March 20th, 2026. While the mainstream media was busy covering political theater, a fortified command center belonging to the Israeli Defense Forces was subjected to a direct kinetic strike. The structure was deeply reinforced. The airspace above it was protected by the most dense, overlapping anti-missile architecture ever engineered. It did not matter. The facility suffered absolute structural compromise, and 7 senior IDF officers were permanently neutralized in a single moment. In that instance, the weapon was not listed as unidentified. Intelligence analysts and open-source investigators tracked the telemetry and confirmed the operational signature. It was the FATTAH-2. To understand the terrifying reality of what defense grids across the Middle East are now facing, you have to understand the physics of the FATTAH-2. For the last 30 years, Western defense doctrine has been built on a single, comforting assumption: predictable ballistic physics. When a standard ballistic missile launches, it follows a fixed parabolic arc. It ascends, hits its apogee, and falls in a highly predictable trajectory. A radar tracks the launch, a computer calculates the geometric intercept point, and a multi-million-dollar interceptor is fired to meet it in the sky. It is a reliable, if expensive, math equation. The FATTAH-2 completely shatters that equation. It is not a traditional ballistic missile. It carries a hypersonic glide vehicle. It does not fall toward its target. It glides. Boosted into the upper atmosphere, the vehicle detaches and begins surfing the edge of space at velocities between Mach 13 and Mach 15, roughly 18,000 kilometers per hour. But the raw speed is only half the nightmare. The true terror for air defense commanders lies in its terminal phase capability. As it descends, the FATTAH-2 actively maneuvers. It jinks. It alters its pitch and yaw simultaneously. It executes lateral shifts across its terminal approach. By the time a defense computer has calculated an intercept solution and launched an interceptor, the target has already changed its vector. The interceptor arrives at an empty geometry where the FATTAH-2 used to be, while the glide vehicle obliterates the infrastructure below. Even the executives who build these advanced defense systems have publicly admitted that trying to intercept a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle with a standard interceptor is physically and geometrically impossible. 8 days ago, That exact physical profile pierced an impenetrable air defense shield and eliminated an entire command node. Today, an American base suffers a catastrophic kinetic breach. Its runway is cratered. 12 service members sustain casualties. And the Pentagon is asking you to believe they simply don't know what hit them. They are asking you to ignore the undeniable operational signature staring them right in the face. But a hypersonic glide vehicle is only the blade. To deliver a strike like the one we saw at Prince Sultan this morning, without the defense grid successfully locking on, you have to blind the target first. And that brings us to the second, equally terrifying half of this tactical equation. To execute a decapitation strike on a heavily defended American installation like Prince Sultan Air Base, raw speed and terminal maneuverability are not enough. The airspace over the Arabian Peninsula is saturated with the most advanced electronic warfare, or EW, architecture on the planet. For decades, the Pentagon has projected an aura of absolute invulnerability based on this invisible shield. These EW systems are engineered to detect radio frequencies, scramble GPS signals, and digitally sever the telemetry links of incoming threats. It is a multi-billion-dollar dome of electromagnetic dominance designed to neutralize attacks before they even reach the kinetic interception layer. But what happens when the adversary simply refuses to use the electromagnetic spectrum? This brings us to the vanguard of the attack, the unmanned aerial vehicles the Pentagon briefly mentioned in their sanitized press release. Intelligence assessments from recent theater-level engagements have identified a terrifyingly simple yet completely un-jammable piece of hardware operating on the modern battlefield: the fiber-optic spooling drone. Adapted directly from the brutal high-intensity combat zones of Eastern Europe, these drones operate on a paradigm-shifting concept. They do not ping a satellite network. They do not broadcast a radio frequency. They do not rely on GPS navigation that can be spoofed by American countermeasures. Instead, as the drone flies, purposely hugging the terrain to stay strictly beneath the radar horizon, it physically unspools a hair-thin, continuous fiber-optic cable trailing all the way back to its launch node. The operator flies it via a direct, physical, closed-circuit data feed. Think about the physics of that for a moment. You cannot electronically jam a piece of glass. You cannot hack a physical wire. The billions of dollars the United States military spent on signal disruption and frequency jamming are completely, fundamentally useless against a continuous spool of fiber optic thread. To an American EW jamming system, this drone is a ghost. There is no emission to detect, no signal to scramble. The strategic objective of these fiber optic drones is not to level the entire base. Their mission is surgical and devastating: kinetically neutralize the Patriot radar arrays and the early warning sensor nodes. They act as the ultimate blindfold. Imagine the sheer panic inside the command center at Prince Sultan Air Base. Highly trained operators staring at multi-million-dollar screens that show absolutely nothing, because their sensors are being systematically compromised by ghost drones they cannot digitally stop. The base is plunged into operational darkness. The multi-billion-dollar Patriot batteries are rendered inert, not because the interceptor missiles are structurally broken, but because the eyes of the defense grid have been gouged out. And once the radar architecture is blind, the corridor is wide open. The sky is cleared for the blade. The Pentagon desperately wants you to believe they are dealing with an unidentified anomaly. But look at the calculated sequence. The base is digitally and physically blinded by un-jammable drones. Then, the primary kinetic payload arrives, moving at an unstoppable velocity, bypassing whatever secondary defenses are desperately fired blindly into the dark, and cratering the runway with terminal precision. It is the exact same operational sequence, the exact same signature of defense grid destruction that wiped out 7 senior commanders just 8 days ago. The authorities refused to name the hypersonic blade that struck the American base this morning, but the physics of the devastation leave only one logical conclusion. And that brings us to the most chilling question of all. Why target Prince Sultan? The 12 American casualties are a tragedy, but strategically, they were just collateral damage. The true target was something that keeps the entire American war machine breathing. When a military command plans a strike of this magnitude, they do not risk deploying a highly advanced, terminal maneuvering kinetic weapon just to hit a few barracks. The 12 American casualties reported by Reuters and the Wall Street Journal, including those personnel urgently extracted in critical condition, are an undeniable human tragedy. But in the cold mathematical calculus of theater-level warfare, they were collateral damage. The true objective at Prince Sultan Air Base was parked out on the flight line. The target was the KC-135 Stratotanker fleet. To understand why an adversary would execute a multi-axis, technologically unprecedented breach to crater a runway in the Saudi desert, you have to understand the fundamental vulnerability of modern American air power. The F-35 Lightning II is the most advanced, lethal stealth fighter ever engineered by the military-industrial complex. It is designed to be an absolute ghost in the sky, but that ghost has a painfully short leash. The unrefueled combat radius of an F-35 is heavily restricted. An American stealth fighter cannot take off from a forward operating base in the Gulf, fly deep into hostile, heavily defended airspace, execute a sustained combat patrol, drop its payload, and return home on a single tank of gas. It is physically impossible. They rely entirely on mid-air refueling to project power. The KC-135 Stratotankers are not just logistical support planes. They are the lungs of the United States Air Force in the Middle East. They are the vital force multipliers that allow American stealth fighters to actually reach their targets and survive the trip home. If you destroy the lungs, the fighter fleet suffocates. This is exactly the strategic masterpiece that the architects of this morning's strike just executed. They did not try to dogfight American F-35s in the air. They didn't try to defeat American stealth geometry head-on. That is a losing game. Instead, they deployed a combination of blinding fiber-optic drones and an unstoppable high-velocity kinetic blade to simply blow up the gas station. In military intelligence, we call this operational asphyxiation. Without those KC-135s structurally intact and fully operational, the multi-hundred-million-dollar F-35s are effectively tethered to the tarmac. They are grounded not by enemy fire, but by the undeniable mathematics of fuel consumption. The United States has just had its deep strike retaliatory capability geographically paralyzed in a single morning. You cannot simply airlift a replacement fleet of heavy strategic tankers into a hot zone that has just definitively proven it cannot defend its own airspace from this exact weapon profile. This wasn't a warning shot, it was a surgical amputation of America's ability to project offensive power across the region. And that level of terrifying strategic brilliance is exactly why the Pentagon is desperately hiding behind the word unidentified. Because admitting that an adversary just successfully mapped, blinded, and asphyxiated the core of American air operations, using an operational sequence that behaves exactly like the weapon that killed 7 IDF commanders last week, means confessing a bitter truth. It means the United States is no longer dictating the terms of this conflict. They have been out-engineered, outmaneuvered, and functionally grounded. But if you think the nightmare ends on the burning runways of Saudi Arabia, you are not looking at the whole map. Because the paralysis of the U.S. Air Force just triggered a countdown for the only other power projection tool Washington has left in the region. If the United States Air Force is functionally grounded in the Middle East, the entire burden of American power projection instantly shifts to the United States Navy, specifically the Fifth Fleet and the carrier strike groups currently operating in the region. But here is the geopolitical nightmare that is paralyzing the admirals in the Pentagon right now. The Aegis combat system protecting an American aircraft carrier relies on the exact same electromagnetic, radio frequency, and radar tracking physics that were just blindingly defeated in the Saudi desert. If a coordinated swarm of low-altitude fiber-optic drones can completely bypass a heavily fortified, land-based EW grid, they can absolutely overwhelm the electronic warfare countermeasures of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. And if the escort destroyers are blind, the aircraft carrier is nothing more than a 100,000-ton, $13 billion target floating in a bathtub. And waiting in the dark is the exact same maneuvering, high-velocity operational signature that wiped out the IDF command center 8 days ago and just cratered the runway at Prince Sultan. Because of this undeniable vulnerability, U.S. Central Command is now staring down a devastating 48-hour ultimatum. They have exactly 2 options, and both of them represent a catastrophic strategic failure. Option A, they initiate an immediate, desperate, all-in kinetic strike using whatever naval aviation and long-range cruise missiles they have left. They would be forced to blindly hunt down highly mobile, dispersed launch vehicles that their multi-billion-dollar surveillance architecture has completely failed to track. That is a tactical gamble that risks thousands of American naval personnel. Option B, they order a humiliating historical retreat. They pull the carrier strike groups hundreds of miles away from the coastline, retreating deep into the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, simply to buy their early warning radars a few extra seconds of reaction time against a Mach 15 threat. Either way, the era of uncontested American aerospace dominance has officially expired. The invincible shield has been pierced, not by a symmetrical superpower, but by brilliant asymmetric engineering, cheap fiber-optic wire, and terminal phase hypersonic physics. The Pentagon and the mainstream media are doing everything in their power to keep you from understanding this reality. They will keep using words like unidentified and minor injuries to mask the collapse of their strategic architecture. But the burning tarmac, the grounded stealth fighters, and the silence from Washington speak louder than any press briefing ever could. The unipolar moment is over. The defense grid is crumbling. What do you think Washington's next move will be when the carriers are forced to pull back? Drop your strategic forecast in the comments below. Subscribe to bypass the mainstream blackout. Stay vigilant, and I will see you in the next sitrep.